Chapter 4. World after Second World War. Part A. Cold War. Part 1. Background. The 6-year-long Second World War ended in August 1945 with the Allied nations America, England, France and Russia defeating the enemy nations Germany, Italy and Japan. The war killed about 1.5 crore soldiers, destroyed numerous industrial centers and cities, leaving millions of people homeless. The economy collapsed, giving rise to unemployment and scarcity of food and commodities. The Americans were not much affected, as the war was not fought on their land. Moreover, during the war, America had strengthened its economy by providing the participating nations with essential commodities. Russia had adopted the scorched earth policy to stop Germany's Nazi chain of continuous victory. Thus, it acquired an important place in the world. A scorched earth policy is a warfare strategy in which everything that might be useful to an enemy, including food sources, houses, communication, crops, industries, water resources, and even people are destroyed, especially by fire. After the German attack on Russia and Japanese attack on the American naval base in Pearl Harbor during the Second World War, Russia and America had temporarily allied. But after the end of the war, the two countries became competitors and engaged in what came to be known as the Cold War. The Cold War was a state of political and military tension between America and Russia. Cold War. Meaning. Post-Second World War, many problems arose between America and Russia due to differences in their philosophy and political belief. Russia wanted to spread communism in the world, while America was opposed to communism and wanted to protect democracy and capitalism. These differences intensified as a result of mutual suspicion, forming a war-like condition in the world immediately after the Second World War. The condition was characterized by a nuclear arms race, political disbelief, spying, and poisonous canvassing by media. American diplomat Bernard Baruch was the first person to term this condition as a Cold War. Professor Walter Lippmann described the conditions between America and Russia as Mirage War, along with the term Cold War. Professor Young Hum Kim described the Cold War as a world of free economy and communism, as well as tension and conflict between the two countries. The Cold War was a political war between America and Russia. Although there was no direct war between these two countries, the tensed state resulted in many small wars in different countries of the world. The Cold War saw a nuclear arms race between the two superpowers. During the Second World War, America dropped atom bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, while Russia proved its might by conducting its first nuclear test in 1949. Thus, the Cold War meant no war, but no peace either. Chapter 4: World after Second World War. Part A: Cold War. Part 2: Causes of the Cold War. 1. Supremacy between America and Russia, the superpowers. England, France, Germany, and Italy were greatly distracted by the Second World War. Japan was destroyed by the atom bombs. Thus, after the war, America and Russia were the only countries that could influence the international politics. 2. Communism in Russia. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1971 in Russia gave birth to Karl Marx's communist rule. America and the other West European countries believed in capitalism and felt that the Russian communism was the greatest obstacle to the capitalist economy. This increased the enmity between America and Russia. 3. Differences in philosophical thinking. The Cold War was a result of the differences between the communist and the capitalist philosophies. Professor Robert Duplessis explained capitalism as a planned and special way to create physical wealth. Karl Marx made the Russians aware about the negative effects of capitalism through his books Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto. He believed in the philosophy that the workers, laborers, and the other deprived people should unite to destroy feudalism and capitalism and end privatization. He stated that the Russian communism would become a reality only when there would be equality in the state. Thus, he wanted the workers to take the ruling power in their hands, along with the tools of production. On the other side, the Americans and the West European countries had started supporting capitalism with the onset of the Industrial Revolution. They believed in free economy and were against communism. Thus, the two ideologies were practically opposed to each other, developing suspicion and mistrust between the two sides. Conflicts arose from these differences. 4. Russian disobedience of the Yalta and Balkan Treaty. The Yalta Conference was the meeting in February 1945 between the American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and the Russian President Joseph Stalin. Russia was to gain territory from the eastern portion of Poland. Stalin promised free elections in Poland. However, he broke this treaty and established communist government in Poland. Non-communist political parties were suppressed and democratic elections were never held. Stalin had also signed the Balkan Treaty in 1944 with the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill to establish the balance of power that the two countries should have in the Balkans. Romania, Greece, Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Bulgaria were divided between them. But Stalin did not keep his promise and created workers' dictatorship in Romania, Greece, Hungary, and Yugoslavia with no British influence. Stalin's act upset England. 5. Poisonous canvassing on media. Stalin wanted to spread communism throughout the world. On the other hand, the American President Truman and the British Prime Minister Churchill wanted to destroy communism. Thus, the capitalist and the communist countries began to campaign against each other through newspaper, radio, and television. This poisonous canvassing resulted in increased jealousy between the two nations. 6. Arms race. The nuclear arms race was central to the Cold War. America used atomic bombs on Japan during the Second World War. This led to an arms race between America and Russia. Both the countries massively built up their stockpiles of nuclear weapons. After the Second World War, Russia performed nuclear tests to show its progress and preparedness. America started its alliance of NATO, SEATO, and CENTO to stop communism in Asia and Europe. Russia and its alliance got together with the Warsaw Pact at the same time. This competition made the Cold War severe. Chapter 4. World after Second World War. Part A. Cold War. Part 3. Progress of the Cold War. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia led to the formation of a communist government based on the principles of Karl Marx. Much to the dislike of the capitalists, new programs of social and economic development were put forward in front of the world, and conflicts started. One. Berlin's blockade and division of Germany. One of the first major international crises of the Cold War was the 1948 Berlin blockade. After its defeat in the Second World War, Germany was divided into 4 zones as a part of the reparations, and to make sure that the Nazi Party would not regain control and re-establish their military. The American, the British, and the French zones together made up the western 2/3 of Germany, while the Russian zone comprised the eastern third. Berlin, the former capital, was partitioned into 4 sectors for administrative purposes and was surrounded by the Russian zone. By 1948, the Western Allies of America, France, and Britain began merging their occupation zones in the western part of Germany into a single independent German state. They took steps to reform the currency in the parts of Germany they occupied. Russia opposed this move and imposed a blockade on West Berlin, cutting off all land and rail routes into the western sectors. Their aim was to force the Western powers to allow the Russians to start supplying Berlin with food, fuel, and aid, thereby giving the Russians control over the entire city. In response, the Western Allies organized the Berlin Airlift to carry supplies to the people in West Berlin. The Berlin blockade lasted 318 days. On May 12, 1949, Stalin abandoned the blockade. As a result of the Berlin crisis of 1948, Germany was divided into the Federal Republic of Germany, that is, West Germany, and the Democratic Republic of Germany, that is, East Germany, until 1990. Two. NATO Treaty. America and 11 other countries, Canada, England, France, Italy, Belgium, Denmark, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and Ireland established the NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, on April 4, 1949 at Washington. This treaty was structured on the basis of defense and economic policy. It was the main US-led military alliance against the Russians throughout the duration of the Cold War. Later, Greece, Turkey, and West Germany too joined the NATO treaty. Three. Rise of Communist China. The Communist Republic was founded in China on October 1st, 1949, under the leadership of Mao Zedong. This brought China on Russia's side, making Russia more powerful. To curb the communist government of China, America opposed its permanent membership in the Security Council of UNO. This made the relationship between America and Russia more bitter. Finally, China was awarded permanent membership in the Security Council of UNO in October 1971. Four. Russian nuclear test. After Stalin's death in March 1953, Nikita Khrushchev became the President of Russia. At the same time, American President Truman was replaced by Eisenhower. With Russia's successful test of atomic bomb in 1953, conflict between the two countries increased during this period, and the Cold War between them worsened. There was space race between them too. Five. Seattle Treaty. America was not happy about China's growing influence on Myanmar, that is, Burma, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, and thus Seattle, or Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, was created in order to control the spread of communism in Southeast and Central Asia. The treaty was a military alignment signed at Manila on September 8, 1954, by the representatives of America, England, France, Australia, Pakistan, Philippines, New Zealand, and Thailand. Top priority was given to the principle of collective protection. All the members promised to help out if any one of the members would be attacked by a foreign country. Six. Warsaw Treaty. The Warsaw Treaty was Russia's response to America's NATO treaty, and its major objective was to give a befitting reply to the capitalist countries. The Warsaw Treaty was signed in a conference held from May 11th to May 14th, 1955 in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. It was attended by Russia and the communist countries under its influence: Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Albania, Bulgaria, East Germany, Romania, and Poland. The treaty was for cooperation, friendship, and help, and to develop economical and cultural relationship. The treaty called on the member states to come to the defense of any member attacked by an outside force, and it set up a unified military command. China and North Korea supported Russia, though they were not participating members. Hence, Russia got supremacy. Thus, the world was divided into two groups: America's group and Russia's group. Chapter 4: World after Second World War. Part A: Cold War. Part 4. 7. Eisenhower Theory. After the Second World War, when Western Europe lay devastated, the American Secretary of State George Marshall announced the European Recovery Program. Russia turned down the plan when it was offered to the countries of Eastern Europe that were under the Russian influence. The plan created an economic miracle in Western Europe, with the industries producing twice as much as they had been the year before the war broke out. An international crisis, the Suez Crisis, was triggered in the Middle East on July 26, 1956. America and England refused to finance Egypt's construction of the Aswan High Dam as promised, in response to Egypt's growing ties with the communist Czechoslovakia and Russia. The Egyptian President Jamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal and declared that the tolls collected from ships passing through the canal would pay for the construction of the Aswan High Dam within 5 years. Military intervention by England, France, and Israel started. When Russia threatened to enter the Suez Crisis on the side of the Egyptians, America forced the Israelis, the British, and the French to withdraw to prevent conflict with Russia. The Suez Canal was of strategic importance to both Russia and America. It was in both of their interests to keep the canal open. In response to the Suez War and to prevent Russia from entering Egypt, the Eisenhower Doctrine was made. Under this doctrine, a country could request America for economic assistance or aid from the American military forces if it was being threatened by armed aggression from Russia. This intensified the Cold War. 8. Russian President Khrushchev's visit to America. Russian President Nikita Khrushchev visited America in September 1959. Along with Eisenhower, he decided to arrange a summit meeting in Paris in June 1960 with America, Russia, Britain, and France to try to sort out the things. The relation between the two countries somewhat improved, reducing the international tension. 9. U-2 Incident. On May 1st, 1960, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Russia and the pilot, Gary Powers, was captured. The Americans were forced to admit that it was a spy plane, though at first they tried to say that it was a weather plane. Russia raised this issue in the Paris summit that met on May 14th and condemned the act. America responded by simply stating that they needed to know about Russia's secret preparations of war. The problem of Berlin was not discussed, which ultimately led to the Berlin Wall. The Paris summit was a failure, and thus the Cold War was intensified. Chapter 4. World after Second World War. Part A. Cold War. Part 5. End of Cold War. In 1980, Ronald Reagan became the President of America. Mikhail Gorbachev, who became the President of Russia in 1985, realized that Russia could not afford the arms race and initiated the arms reduction talks with Reagan. The demolition of the Berlin Wall in 1989 united East and West Germany into one country. The Warsaw Treaty was ended. The communist power ended in Eastern Europe. Thus, the efforts of the Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev ended the Cold War. Effects of the Cold War. The Cold War went on for several years after the Second World War, greatly affecting the international issues. 1. The world was divided into two groups. Russia and its allies fought for communism, whereas America and its allies fought for capitalism. 2. Growth in arms race. The arms race became the focus of the Cold War. Both America and Russia were at loggerheads to emerge as the strongest in terms of their weapons. They strengthened the army, the navy, and the air forces of their allies too. Modern missiles, fighter planes, and nuclear submarines were invented during the Cold War. 3. An inspiration to nuclear weapon competition. America dropped nuclear bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and destroyed them during the Second World War. With this incident, the race to become a nuclear nation intensified, and Russia performed a nuclear test in 1949. The two countries started producing weapons on a large scale. Thus, the Cold War motivated the two countries into a competition of producing weapons. The world was brought to the threshold of destruction. 4. Discredit of UNO. The United Nations organization was founded as a world organization with the objective of maintaining international peace and security. However, as the Cold War raged on for years, the world saw the competition for power, nuclear weapons, partition of the world, and other resulted problems. The UNO had put forth the idea of the entire world is one family. But it failed to achieve its goal and thus lost its credibility. 5. Human welfare was neglected. The competition of inventing and accumulating destructive weapons during the Cold War created fear and terror in the minds of people all over the world. About 25% of the income was spent on research and production of weapons. Development in other areas was neglected. This resulted in negligence of human development, and the scarcity of essential commodities affected the life of people very badly. Thus, the quality of life deteriorated. 6. Growth of non-aligned movement. Many countries unwillingly supported the superpowers during the Cold War under political and economic pressure. The Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, Yugoslavian President Marshal Tito, and Egyptian President General Jamal Abdel Nasser established the non-aligned movement at Belgrade in 1961. It was formed as an attempt to thwart the Cold War and on issues of disarmament and economic development. It ruled that member countries could not be involved in alliances with the main world powers. The non-aligned movement weakened the Cold War and forced America and Russia to rethink about it seriously. With a war taking place now, the world would be ruined by the nuclear weapons and advanced techniques of war. So, the entire mankind should shoulder the responsibility of avoiding a war.